Hi there, I am Celia Mall and I'm going to show you how to make a no wire, no fog face mask. Now when I started making face masks, first off I decided on the Olsen style mask that has a round curve and is fitted to the face. It has a better seal around the face than the pleated masks do, but the problem I have is I wear glasses. And every mask I've ever had with wires or whatever has always fogged. So I didn't like the concept of wires. So I came up with nose flaps. These are integral to the design and they help to fill that gap between your nose and your cheek to prevent your glasses from fogging up. Now, as you can see, my original pattern is getting pretty shabby here, so I need to make a new one. So, you'll need to get your face mask pattern. Now, I chose one from craftpassion.com, and you're going to measure, in order to create this nose flap, you're going to measure about 1.25 inches or so down from the seam line corner. Okay, right there. Alright. And then you're going to measure from the seam line, not from the cutting line, 1.5 inches straight out. Okay. Now you're going to draw a lovely little parabola like you used to draw in algebra in high school. And I'm going to use my old one as a guide to make a fresh pattern here. And just making this lovely little parabola. Okay, so now we've got our lovely little parabola that we've added on to the pattern. That is going to be the nose flap. And you're going to want to repeat the same thing on your lining fabric pattern. Okay, now we're going to start cutting this out. Use regular scissors, not sewing scissors for cutting paper. Alright, now we have got our main fabric and lining cut out. This lovely little parabola shape we've got added on to the pattern. Now we need to cut out the fabric. Okay, so now we're going to actually cut out the pattern. Now, the main thing with this is that you're going to want this line needs to be in line with the grain, either along the grain or across the grain. And we're just going to pin that. Now we'll get the sewing scissors. Now, I already have some lining fabric cut out. So, the first step is going to be to sew the front edge of the mask together. You need to do that on the lining and on the front. So you're going to put those right sides together. My pattern has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from the edge on this curved edge. Now, what I find with this pattern is once you get to the bottom seam allowance, I like to turn it and just go straight down, because you don't want that cloth at the bottom to dig into your chin. Once we have that seamed, we need to clip, because that's a curve. So you're going to clip little triangles out of there. You need to be very careful not to cut into the seam line. I'm going to get reasonably close to it, but not too close. You see we've got a nice little series of triangles. And you end up with a lot of these little fabric triangles. My best friend calls these mask glitter. Now, before we're ready to put these together, we have one more step we need to do. We need to stitch the seam down to one side. Alright, so we're going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the seam line. You have to stitch, so you can see that's a curve, so we're just going to have to work a little bit at a time. You can't go too fast. And stitch down that seam. Alright, you need to do that on both pieces. Now, it's time to put the front and back together. You're going to put right sides together. Now, you're going to want to match those seams in the center front at the top. Then you're going to line up the curve. So that those curves match each other on both sides of there. And we're going to stitch. There's a little bit of a trick to this, because you have to stitch along a curved line, and it's not that easy to do if you're not an experienced seamstress, but you just want to keep it moving slow. Keep to wherever your reference mark is for your seam allowance. Now, what I prefer to do on the nose flaps is to take that seam allowance in just a little bit. Not a huge amount, but you're going to go for a more scant seam allowance on the nose flaps. When you get to that center seam, make sure you turn. And we're going to do the same thing at the bottom of the mask. Going to make sure that you've got those seam lines lined up. I go all speedier. Again, when you get to the seam line in the middle, you're going to turn. Alright, the halves of our mask are stitched together. Now, before we can turn it, we need to clip again. And since we've got some funky curves here on this top edge, we're going to do some different kinds of clipping. Where the curve goes in, we're just going to clip in a straight line. Where the curve comes out, we're going to do those little triangles like we did before. Now, at this place where it curves in to the very center, I usually take one clip there, one clip close to the seam, and then we start on triangles again. Remember, we want to go almost to the seam line, but not over it, because if you cut into your seam line, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Now, at the bottom, we're going to do what we did at the top. One clip to the side, one clip close to the seam line. That'll give us a little bit of ease there as we turn this around. Alright, now we're ready to turn it. When you turn it, you're going to want to stick your fingers in there and push out those nose flaps. As you can see, this is a little bit bunched up. So what I do is I like to give it a little stretch so that that'll lay flat right there where it's going to be at the top of your nose. And I'm going to put a pin in it. Now, I'm going to go down to the side. As you can see, the lining is smaller than the outside. And that's because we're going to be folding over that outside to make a little casing that you can use to put a ribbon through, elastic, whatever you want to put through there to hold your mask on. So, alright, the trick with the nose flap is you're going to fold down as close to that center seam as possible, and then you're going to fold it over so that it's where the curve comes in to the side. You want to make sure that's smooth, there's no puckers, there's no folds of fabric there, and you're going to put a pin in there. Same thing on this side. We need to secure the side so it's not getting in our way. And then we're going to look at where that curve begins and close to the center seam. Fold over that nose flap to the inside. Now we're going to do a stitching 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now we don't need to go all the way to the edge of that outside fabric because we're going to be folding that over and stitching it down. But you do want to get some of that so that the fabric will stay folded over. And we're just going to come along about an 1/8 of an inch, scant 1/8 of an inch. And you're just going to follow along there. And you want to make sure that that's not warping. Now stitch carefully as you come to where the folds are. And I usually stitch, about 1/2 an inch down so that fabric will stay folded. And we've got our nose flaps. Now we're going to do the same 1/8 of an inch stitching at the bottom. And an 1/8 of an inch. Scant 1/8 of an inch. Now we're going to do one more thing before we make the casings, and that is we need to stitch the layers together by the seam line in the center. I made this mistake at first. When I made my first mask, I thought that it would be great to have some air between those, and really it's not. The lining is more likely to come in and stick to your nose and mouth if you don't have those two stitched together. So the way I do that, I start at the bottom. Okay, and you can see I'm going to be stitching on the opposite side of where that top stitching was. Now the reason I start at the bottom is because, again, you don't want this to end up bunching up under your chin. Believe me, it is uncomfortable. So we're going to come in here and do another, we're going to top stitch scant 1/8 of an inch from that seam line in the center, stitching both of those layers together. Okay, so this was the original top stitching when you stitch down the seam allowance of the individual pieces. This is the new top stitching in the front. Want about the same distance on both sides, so that looks really snazzy. Now we're going to work on the casing on the ends. I have a really good eyeball, so it's about 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. You could iron this, but what I do is I just pin it, and then I do the second fold and you do the same on the other end. I find it's easiest to just pin them both at the same time. So now I'm going to go not even an 1/8, just like a 1/16, very scant, because you want this casing to be as wide as possible if you're going to put something in it. Now what I usually do is I usually put ribbon and then I stitch down. But you can do elastic, you can do a shoelace. I'm going to stitch really, really close to that line. And we'll do the same on the other side. As you can see, we want that really scant so that there's plenty of room in the casing.
Let me zoom in on it.
Your mask is done except for the ties, whatever you want to use. You can use elastic ear loops, whatever it is that pleases you to fasten this mask to your face. You have your nose flaps that are right there, and they're going to come down on the sides of your nose and help to prevent your breath from coming up and fogging your glasses. This is my mask that I wear every day. I made this back before elastic became unobtainium. So I use elastic for the whole thing. I've gotten now to where I use ribbon because, as I said, you can't get elastic anymore. Now, the way I put this on is I put the loop that's going to go around my neck. Okay, if you've got ribbons, you'll tie the loop there. And then the key here is you want to make sure that those nose flaps are coming up the sides of your nose. Okay, and then that goes back over your head. Kind of adjust that. And then here's my favorite part, is I put on my glasses and I snug my glasses down right over the top, the very top of that mask, so that provides an extra little seal right there to keep my glasses from fogging up. Thank you.